Alrighty, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another episode of The World Gone Mad. It's been a couple of days, actually almost a week, so it's been way too long. So it's time to, do a show. We're gonna get into the music industry once more, so that should be good. Let me get you the intro, and then after that we'll get into it.
In a world gone mad, the good and the bad and the good will challenge us good. The mind has been twisted, the soul has been tormented, till it is broken and lost. The world has gone mad, and you know what is really sad. Most people do not realize they have been had. I think we should not even be here to begin with, but all we do most of the time is to try and escape this shit. The world has gone mad, and probably it had always been this way, even when times were okay. Soon enough, those will come whom are ready to slay, take away what we once knew, and life begins anew. The world has gone mad with the sorrows of the world. The sorrows of mankind are done to us from behind. Behind a veil we cannot yet fully see. But I will tell you one day you'll be free. Oh, has gone mad, and probably it had always been this way, even when times were okay. Soon enough, those will come whom are ready to slay, take away what we once knew, and life begins anew.
All right, ladies and gentlemen. So, it's been a while. Now, today I want to go back into the the wheelings and dealings of the music industry with none other better. Who else better to talk about it than Mr. Mark Devlin? And he just so happened he was on the Things Visible and Invisible, so I'm going to share that with you. He also produced a clip about 80s rock videos. And now you don't have to necessarily be into music or rock music or pop music or anything, because this is just exposing a manipulative tool that is very, very powerful and works very well on us. So if you look at it from that perspective, you don't have to like rock music or rap music or anything, or music in general. And even if you do, it kind of might damage you a little bit if you learn what they're talking about in terms of your favorite artist, and might, burst that bubble, that musical bubble. But I mean, still, it doesn't affect me. I still love rock bands. I still listen to it. It doesn't affect me, but I do want to know what's going behind it, and I want to see the messages and the lyrics that they put in there. There's so much to it, and it's so in your face once you see it. Yeah, that makes it, difficult sometimes, but it's good to know. And maybe at some point you will say, like, okay, I've heard it now. I've know now what it is and what it does, and I don't need it anymore, or not. I don't know. But anyway, we're gonna kick it off here today with. I don't know how long I can go because I don't have a lot of juice on the phone left, but we'll see how far we'll get. An hour should be possible, perhaps two. Anyway, Mark Devlin, he showed up on Things Visible and Invisible, and we're gonna listen to this. Every song you love is a satanic mind control. Ooh, wow, now that is something. So get ready, get your popcorn.
You're about to
ready,
enter a world
and listen to this.
you ever see. A world where what you think is music hides a darker rhythm, where melodies don't just move your feet, but whisper to your mind. Is the music industry a harmless mix of glitz and glamour? or rather a portal to occult rituals, mind control experiments, and deep-rooted social engineering. Let's turn up the volume here on Things Visible and Invisible. Mark Devlin is a UK-based club and radio DJ, music journalist and author. In 2010, he underwent a transformative awakening that led him to dig deeper into the hidden reality of the mainstream music industry. As an author, he's best known for his multi-volume series, Musical Truth, where he investigates hidden agendas and the true nature of the corporate music machine. And he joins me down the line from his home in England. Mark, welcome to Things Visible and Invisible.
Hey Sean, good to be with you.
Mark, I've been following your work for some time, and it intrigues me and fascinates me in equal measure. The music industry has shall we say, a good PR. People think of it as something very glamorous, something in various ways, either wholesome or something which is cutting edge in a sort of performative way. But most people see it as pure entertainment of one form or another. You, however, would probably disagree and would probably, to use an expression I think the Beatles said, open people's mind and drift downstream. So where would you like to start on this magical mystery tour?
Well, certainly entertainment, popular culture, and therefore music offer the perfect vehicles through which to get things like mass mind control.
Yes, absolutely true. And we all fall victim to it because it's done so good, right? Who doesn't love good tunes? I always say good tunes, good times. But, the question rises within oneself. And if you listen to Osman's show earlier on, I was talking about the inner process. Is this getting you closer to the inner process or taking you further away from the inner process? And I think it's a bit of both, because good music can definitely put you in a good place. But this specific topic that we're talking about here, the music industry and rock music and popular music, the tool used to get to your mind, there's a lot of depth to it. And I think that's important to get. So, like I mentioned at the beginning, you don't necessarily have to be into music to listen to this. But if you want to uncover tools that they use against us, and done so sophisticatedly, in a way that we even love it, that always reminds me of Aldous Huxley saying what they're doing, what they wanted to do, is to make people love their slavery. And what better way than to give people entertainment and, free lifestyles of sexual choices and, the food, all the food you can eat. Now, I'm not against choice, but I think one should be able to restrain oneself somewhat to keep the balance. But anyway, enough about me, because this is a long clip. This is 24 minutes, and I got another one that's also 24 minutes, so we're easily going to fill up an hour, and if I have enough juice left on the phone, we'll get into the second hour. So welcome, everybody. Thank you for joining the World Gone Mad, and we're going to listen to this great conversation with Mark Devlin.
And social engineering agendas achieved, because nobody's expecting to have their worldview shaped and molded for them, and their belief systems and their values shaped and molded for them, when they think they're just unwinding from a long day at work and chilling out to a favorite album, or going to see a favorite band perform, or watching a favorite movie or TV show. But this is when the mind is wide open for manipulation, because where things like symbolism get targeted is at the subconscious mind in its subliminal state. And the subconscious mind gets engaged when we're relaxed, when we're chilled, when we're switched off from conscious thought. And that's why entertainment, if you are a satanic psychopath, for example, who wants to control large numbers of people, that's where it comes in as the perfect way to get all this stuff done. And prior to probably 18 years ago, at this time of year, you would have found me as a DJ and I would have a whole bunch of gigs in the diary leading up to Christmas and New Year. And all I'd be thinking about is parties, tunes, going to clubs, traveling, rocking a crowd. That was all that was important to me. But things got to the stage.
I don't think actually it's necessarily bad, but it's a lot of self-indulgent behavior, self-pleasurable behavior. And, if you want to get to the roots of that, you have to go into the nature of pleasure itself. So, some tough questions, ladies and gentlemen. Some deep soul-searching one has to do in this world. And it ain't easy. And it ain't often very comfortable. But one has to do it in order to break on through to the other side, to use some of Jim's words.
Just over 15 years ago, I guess, where I came to realize that the world is nothing like we've spent our entire lives being trained to think that it is. And at its most extreme form, that expresses itself in the form of government and, political systems. And you come to realize that there's a hierarchy there, there's a pyramid of power, there are secret society groups and networks which control these institutions. And that filters out into all other areas of organized society and our regular daily lives. So you find it in the world of academia, universities, colleges, schools. You find it in the world of medicine. You find it in big business and the tech industries. You find it in the mainstream media and what gets told to us through the evening news and newspapers and such. And if you are prepared to accept that this is the case, and I got to that stage, then you would be very naive to assume that the same forces and powers that have managed to get all these other institutions in their grip and under their control would have passed up the opportunities that entertainment, popular culture, music offer to push their agendas and get society driven in the directions that they want. And of course, this is...
Now, to play a bit of Charles Giuliani, he would probably say something like, because people think, even if they believe some of it, they tend to partially believe things, right? So they go like, well, that might be true, but not my band, they will never do such a thing. And, if you look into it, all of them, everyone at the top of the industry is beholden to a power structure. And all the stories of bands, they start the same. They become big, they have success, they have lots of success, and there's nothing in their bank. And then suddenly they manage to sort that out, the financial side to it. You have to be a bit rough. And then you get to a level where you get absolute stardom. And that's where the whole thing starts. Now, I don't necessarily believe that all these artists are Satanists themselves, but there is a lot of influence, and sometimes they don't even write their own songs. Other people write their songs. Sometimes they're not even playing their own songs. So it's a thin blue line, as I can say that. It's very rough to see exactly where it all comes in. And you have the engineers, you have sound engineers. It's not necessarily always the artists themselves that are bad people or anything, So, but let's dig into this.
It's not the case, and I came to realize this begrudgingly all those years ago. And what I saw was many researchers who exposed the way this dynamic plays out in the world of politics and big business and such, but very few that were joining the dots to demonstrate how it pervades the music industry. So I kind of saw a vacancy there, and nobody else was doing this job, and I stupidly volunteered myself for it, and it became my life, and this is what I've been doing full time for the past who knows how many years anymore.
Now, you've said an awful lot in that opening discourse, Mark. I understand we've had people on this show who have talked a lot about military-industrial complexes, about big tech, et cetera, and how these can be manipulated, etc. We've had some people on talking about the music industry, often talking from a spiritual angle about it, that somehow it's being manipulated by forces not of this world, in a sense. However, your thesis is probably the most intricate in regard to this, because what you're talking about here is not just a different way of looking at the entertainment industry, and in particular the music industry, but a different way of looking at the world around us. Would that be a fair summation of where your thesis, where your philosophy is taking us?
Yeah, it's everything. It's all of the above. If you are a researcher that's going to look into the true nature of what goes on in this world, but you're going to remain rooted in the conspiratorial, so to speak. So the detail, the nuts and the bolts, the names, the places, the detail, the documents, certainly you're going to get a very good handle on who really runs things and what these different ways of life are really used for. But if you're not going to look at the spiritual, esoteric, otherworldly aspect of it, you're going to be missing large parts of the picture. And the opposite is also true. So you get people that are very fixated on the spiritual, metaphysical, paranormal side of things, but they might not pay enough attention to the detail of how all this stuff gets done. So I think my work weaves together those two very broad subject areas. And over the course of the 4 books that I've written over 10 years and the hundreds of talks and podcasts that I've given, I think I bring together these different strands, and I do my very best job in joining the dots and showing how everything is connected. So
No one likes us. Speak for yourself, mate. Well, you know, this is getting very interesting now. I love this stuff because, yes, you have to look at all. You have to sort of uncover all the stones. You know, you have to turn out. You have to look at every card that's involved in this. And like I said, it's not necessarily once you get into that industry, it's pure evil. No, I think a lot of musicians and people in generally artists are very sensitive people. But again, it's not necessarily them who are pushing all this. Now, of course, later, like when you saw with the pandemic, for instance, that suddenly they start ordering you all to take jabs or you're not welcome at the show, and even my favorite artists were doing that, and that's disgusting. So there is a part where I believe they have to do that to some extent. They're in that same mind frame where they think they have to do it. So they're also themselves pretty much controlled, actually. So, yeah, there is many realms to it, and I will also later, not today, but some other days, I will bring on some of Charles's research. He done also some shows on the music industry and dealing with a specific, people who is behind this. And they talk about a deal with the devil, but we know who that devil really is, don't we?
You have music's military and mind control connections. So this is the title of one of my long-running talks. And this is where I demonstrate how the music industry was, in its early days, based upon the military-industrial complex. So the very early record labels through which big names like Elvis Presley, the Beatles, the Rolling Stones, these sort of groups, Pink Floyd, David Bowie, we're talking labels like RCA, Decca, Parlophone,
I love all that stuff.
EMI.
That's the problem.
All of them began life with military uses. So RCA, for example, is the Radio Corporation of America, and it was developed directly out of the US Navy. And it's the same story with EMI in Britain and those other labels that I mentioned.
Yeah, that's true. But that goes for many things in life. Many good things were first developed in the military. Think about cars, Think about instant coffee. Well, that's a very innocent thing, but, many, many things first get done in the military, because first they have to use for military use. So then it's not different with sound, actually, the way they've used it upon us, and television and all these wonderful technologies that we nowadays have and can enjoy. And it's not all bad, because technology is, takes no sides. I mean, you could take radio and you could broadcast beautiful sounds. You could put beautiful resonances all over the city if you want to, even like white noise or other kind of things. So it could be very beneficial. But what are they blasting every day from these radio stations? This kind of corporate music and the news every hour and commercials, noise pollution, I would call it almost.
So prior to becoming record labels and releasing music by these very big names in the early days of rock and roll, they were concerned with things like sonar, radar systems, different radio technologies, different ways of manipulating and delivering sound, all for military applications. So this is the first red flag. in that these organizations morphed into entertainment out of purely military usage. And then you've got mind control, because unfortunately wherever you find expressions of the military and military intelligence operations such as MI5, MI6, the CIA, there are endless connections between these organizations and some of the very biggest music artists out there. And again, I demonstrate and detail many of these in my work. You often find the presence of trauma-based mind control. So this is things like MK Ultra, this very far-reaching mind control program coming through those nice folks at the CIA, and the different expressions and derivatives of that. And then, unfortunately, where you find mind control, you often find Satanism and other dark occult practices and ritualistic elements to the way things get done. That's everywhere in popular music. It shouldn't be. There should be no such connections whatsoever, but they just go on endlessly. And then where you find that, you often find other very unsavory elements, such as words beginning with P. So I'd love it to be some other way, and I'd love to have a different message for people, but I'm just reporting on what I've found through having done this job full time for a great number of years. And it was very difficult for me early on because I had to let go a lot of personal heroes. And I think this is why people find this whole subject area just so difficult to grasp and so unsettling, so uncomfortable. Because if you are prepared to accept that the entire industry is not run by particularly nice people, then that inevitably filters down into some of your favorite bands and your favorite artists. And you have to ask yourself honestly, well, what do these people know? What is it they're a part of? What is it they're being used for? And that can lead you into some very unsettling areas. But you either want the truth or you don't. Right. You're either prepared to go with it or you're not. You're either prepared to accept the evidence or you're not. It's one thing or the other. And I'm merely a messenger. I'm sharing my research and my information, which
Mark Devlin, he should be called Mark Angel,
which has been diligently put together over a long period of time, and it's up to people what they do with it. But there's no shortage of information out there, and there's no shortage of citations, resources, and references either, because I provide all of those, lest I be accused of pulling this stuff out of the ether.
Well, we're going to get into all of that, Mark. You've certainly set it up wonderfully. But I have a question, because I think we need to set the parameters here a little bit. You talked about the origins of some of the record companies and their links to the military. We're expecting, that popular music, rock and roll, rock music as it became, the way people have very much linked with some of the ideas that you're about to discuss with us. However, my question is this: was it ever thus? Was there as much interest in controlling the masses in popular music or popular entertainment, say 100 years ago at the start of motion pictures, or popular music from the 30s and 40s? Or is this something which really comes about post-World War II with the growth of the military-industrial complex on both sides of the Atlantic?
It certainly got stepped up post-World War II. And in my research, I take as a starting point 1955, because you've got to start somewhere. If I was going to take the entirety of known human history, I'd tie myself up for several lifetimes. So my starting point is 1955, and I begin with the advent of rock and roll, the rock and roll era. So 1955 is the year that Bill Haley and his Comets came out with Rock Around the Clock. That was quite a revolution.
Well, I think you can claim it goes back way longer, and I did this show months ago it came from Red Eyes, and this guy that did all this research into Mozart and all the shenanigans going on there with classical music. So, I'm not saying that there's like necessarily hidden messages in classical music. Could be, but it seemed to be more wholesome back then. But there definitely were things going on there too, and especially the magic flute. Mozart's magic flute is full of symbolism and references. So although he wasn't necessarily the writer of it, he made the music. But so I think it does go back quite a long time. But he's right, you have to start somewhere. So that's interesting. 1955.
Revolutionary song. because it was very different to the music that had gone before in a very sort of austere, staid, rather grey post-war era. Suddenly there was this explosion of colour and vitality and youthful energy at that point in history. And then the following year, you had the emergence of Elvis Presley, and then artists like Buddy Holly and Little Richard and Chuck Berry and all these early rock and roll pioneers. So I start there, and it's very clear to see what the agendas were from the 1950s onwards. That's not to say that there wasn't manipulation prior to that point, and I think, again, it would be quite naive to assume that there hadn't been. If we think back to the classical music era, or the very high point of that genre, I think we would have to conclude that the very biggest names that we've all heard of, the composers of all the music that was played at the time and who we still study today, would have been selected in very much the same way as today's pop music stars are.
Yeah, and that was what in that show, that Red Eye show, came about as well. That the ones that we know now, Mozart and everything, they're genius, and you have to be careful what you say about these things. But at least in that show, they were claiming that there were so many other composers nobody ever heard of, and they were perhaps just as good, or perhaps in some points even better. And why they never made it out of Vienna and all these other places where classical music arose, there's a whole other rabbit hole.
Oh. So many of them would have been Freemasons. Many of them would have come out of important...
Yeah, Mozart was a Freemason that we know, probably Beethoven and the other guys too.
Aristocratic bloodline families. And these are the same methods of selection for choosing many of today's megastars. Often it's down to family bloodlines. It's down to genealogy, ancestry. It's what families these people have been born into, because new generations of the same families that have been deemed important are put to use in influential, prominent roles in society. So 300 years ago, they might have been put out there as a composer of classical music. These days, they might be put out there as a pop star or a producer or a rapper or any other role which gets them into the minds.
Exactly. And if you are an archon or whatever, you don't have this kind of concept of time, I suppose. So you're just dealing with what is there at that period, and whatever instruments you have to work with. So if you take a look at that from that perspective, it also changes the whole ball game
of large numbers of people. It applies to film stars and TV presenters just as much as musicians. But the manipulation would surely have been there for a very long time before my starting point. I just leave the work prior to 1955 to somebody else, because I've kind of got my hands full with the past 70 years.
Okay, so let's take 1955. You're not the first guest we've had who's also marked 1955 as the epoch-changing year. Let's take your idea around bloodlines and the selection of people to front this idea that you have. Let's take somebody that we all know, or we all think we know, and that is Elvis Presley. Now, my understanding of Elvis is that he came from a very poor background, had very little education, formal education, though was a very intelligent man, obviously, but had a wonderful gift. And through the arts of Colonel Tom Parker, managed to get a bit of a headwind in terms of the South, and then went national on television, and because of television and the global reach of television in the United States, became a huge star very, very quickly. That's the kind of official version. The rest we know, the movies and the Vegas and it all ending in a rather sad way. But the official version, Mark, is this, that he was sort of an American hero, a rags to riches story, a man with lots of talent who just happened to hit the zeitgeist at the right time. What say you?
Well, certainly we get what I describe as a Cinderella fairy story to explain where many of these people come from. So take the Beatles, for example. The pervading myth with that group is that they were four regular working class lads from Liverpool who just happened to put together a band, wrote a few catchy tunes, came up with a few chords and riffs, punted around a few demo tapes, and just struck it lucky. Got this mega deal with EMI Records and just happened to blow up and just happened to become the biggest group in music history. And then with Elvis Presley, it's a similar story in that, he's this talented lad from the South, and he was a great singer and had great musical proficiency, was discovered by Colonel Tom Parker, and he just happened to blow up. Certainly, I've not been able to discover anything in his backstory to suggest that he came from one of these important bloodline families. So there is another provision for people to make it big if they don't happen to be born into, these sort of families. And that is if they become chosen ones. So the industry has spotters whose job it is to keep an eye out for emerging talent. And if they come across somebody who they feel has a certain amount of natural musical proficiency, they're going to want them to become an asset to, first of all, sell loads of records, because to a very large extent it is about money. Record corporations like getting rich off of other people's talent. But it's not just about making money. It's also about pushing social engineering agendas and using assets to change the mindsets of large numbers of people, change societal attitudes through social conditioning. And they use rock music stars for that. So somebody like Elvis might get made an approach and an offer, which, if they've come from relative poverty, is going to be very attractive to them. And it would take somebody of a very strong moral and mental constitution, not to mention somebody that's been able to conduct the research to discover for themselves what it is they're about to sign up to say no to a deal like that. And that's the way they ensnare a lot of these young stars. Many of them further down the line realize the true terrible nature of what it is they've got involved with. But by that point, it's pretty much too late to do anything about it. So with Elvis, I think we had someone who certainly was a great showman. He was a great singer. He was a great performer. That was recognized, and it was steered off and harnessed. Colonel Tom Parker is the guy that was put in to handle that whole process. Colonel Tom Parker, not a real colonel, by the way. He was a Dutchman who arrived in America in fairly questionable, dubious circumstances. There are big holes in his backstory, in his CV. He appears to have been a military deserter. It would appear that the controllers would have had something over Colonel Tom Parker. And possibly he was blackmailed or coerced into taking on this role in answering to these higher ups. So with artists of Elvis Presley's stature, they're never going to allow them to go their own way and pursue their own artistic vision. They're always going to want to have a handler in place. So a handler is synonymous with manager. So the acceptable public face of it is that this individual is there to handle the business interests of the artist and get them bookings and handle the liaisons with the record companies and the concert bookers and all this sort of thing. But it goes a bit further than that. What they really are is handlers, in that their role is to handle every aspect of that individual's life, including their personal life, their life away from the public spotlight, as well as what the public gets to see. And this is where we start to get into the realms of mind control of the MK Ultra variety, because a large number of very popular and prominent performers, not just musicians, but Hollywood actors, TV stars, TV presenters, anyone that's in the public spotlight, as well as politicians and business leaders, will often have been subjected to trauma-based mind control programming. And this is a way of keeping them in line, making sure the agendas get pushed, making sure they stay on script and deliver the messages, and making sure they don't go too far their own way in terms of trying to pursue a certain amount of artistic autonomy. So that's the role of handlers. Colonel Tom Parker ticked all the boxes for having been Elvis's handler, and we often get symbolic clues as to the presence of trauma-based mind control, which goes hand in hand with satanic ritual abuse. This ties into the bloodline thing, because many artists that come out of these particular families will have been subjected to satanic ritual abuse. So the handler's role is to stay on top of that whole process.
Right. Mark, unfortunately, believe it or not, we've come to the end of our first episode together, and we're just getting into this. We will continue this in the second episode. I think this is absolutely fascinating. It's a very alternate view of something that we've taken for granted for the last 60-odd years. Tell people where they can find out more about you and where they can pick up a copy of your books.
All right, we're not going to do that because I got the second part already. So let's get into that. Let me take a quick look in the chat because during the clips I can't say too much. But welcome everybody. Thank you for joining, Jeffrey, and other people. Thank you for being in here. We're just 35 minutes in. We're gonna go to the second part here with Mr. Mark Devlin, and we'll see. We'll probably get into the second hour. I got some more stuff. We got also some stuff on the 80s video clips, and we'll see how far we'll get with it. So you stay back there, relax, and listen to this great stuff, great discussions that we're sharing, and it should be good and enjoyable enough, I'd say. After this. All right, let's go to part 2 with Mark Devlin and his great journey into the world of music. Yeah, that should be fascinating, I'd say.
You're about to enter a world few ever see. A world where what you think is music hides a darker rhythm, where melodies don't just move your feet, but whisper to your mind. Is the music industry a harmless mix of glitz and glamour, or rather a portal to occult rituals, mind control experiments, and deep-rooted social engineering? Let's turn up the volume here on Things Visible and Invisible. Mark, the last time we spoke, you really began to tantalize us with some ideas that we may have misunderstood the last 60-odd years in terms of popular entertainment, that it wasn't all just about fun and about young people being young people, but actually that behind the scenes there were kind of puppet masters pulling strings with an agenda. You talked about Elvis Presley, and you talked about his manager, inverted commas, handler, Colonel Tom Parker. Let's move it a little bit more into the UK scene. We're both in the UK at the moment, because you got me thinking about the Beatles. The Beatles and Elvis have similar sort of backstories. As you said, it's a Cinderella story, rags to riches, poverty to fame that they could never have dreamed of. I mean, are we to believe that the Beatles were also part of some kind of nefarious scheme?
Well, they were, and if anyone thinks that artists like Elvis Presley and the Beatles rise to the lofty heights that they achieved purely under their own steam, try it. Have a go. Form a band and see how far you get without signing over to one of these major corporations or one of these key manager/handlers. So the Beatles, according to many researchers, were a product of the Tavistock Institute of Human Relations in London. And this is the major social engineering think tank in the world, seemingly, which specialize in psychological operations. So they employ behavioral scientists and psychologists and anthropologists whose full-time job it is to work out how the human psyche operates, and therefore how it can be manipulated and coerced. And this is a military-grade operation, so Tavistock is connected to British military intelligence, an expression of government. And where you find that, you often find entertainment, because the things go hand in hand with each other. Another arm of it is the BBC. And it's interesting that George Martin, the Beatles' famous producer, known as the fifth Beatle, Sir George Martin, prior to becoming EMI's in-house producer and being given over to the Beatles to work with them on their key albums, worked at the BBC Radiophonic Workshop. And this is an organisation concerned with sonic manipulation, what can be achieved by tinkering around with sound. So it's through the Radiophonic Workshop that we got the very distinctive early theme tune to Doctor Who with that eerie kind of oscillator. That was a great example of the sort of stuff they were producing at the workshop. So then George Martin becomes the Beatles' producer. We know the rags to riches story of the Beatles, but there's a lot of aspects of them which don't normally get discussed. And one thing which mainstream commentators tend not to discuss that much is that the Beatles were effectively two bands, or they had two very distinct eras. So when they first came out, in 1962 with their first hit single, Love Me Do, they were effectively a boy meets girl boy band. Nice, pleasant love songs. She Loves You, Want to Hold Your Hand. By the time 1966 has come around, they've started to get very experimental with their sounds. Tomorrow Never Knows. And then the following year, 1967, known as The Summer of Love, which is a classical master study in the art of social engineering. The changing of societal attitudes to everything, to music, to drugs, to family, to sex, to all points in between. It had really kicked into overdrive by the time the Beatles came out with Sgt. Pepper in early summer 1967. By that point, they'd become very psychedelic, very trippy, very experimental. They'd also become a studio-only band. So the Beatles played their last ever official gig on the 29th of August 1966, Candlestick Park in San Francisco. They only played one other gig beyond that, which was the rooftop one in London for Let It Be, which doesn't really count because it was on a roof. So other than that, they'd become an album-only band. So they were putting out all this amazing sound, which was being curated by Sir George Martin. But nobody actually saw any of this stuff being produced. So we don't actually know that it was just the Beatles themselves that were producing all this amazing stuff, or if there were other parties, other musicians that had been brought in to work on this stuff. There's a researcher by the name of Mike Williams, who's known as Sage of Quay, and he's put out a ton of research to demonstrate that the Beatles cannot possibly have written all the songs that they've been credited with during a particular period in 1965 for the Rubber Soul album. It's just impossible because they were doing too much and the album was produced too quickly. So if we can demonstrate that that's the case for that one period in 1965, and we can, with evidence, with proof, then isn't it likely that that would have been the case in other periods during the Beatles' history? So if we're prepared to accept that, we have to accept that Lennon and McCartney did not write all the songs that they're said to have done. Several hundred songs from these couple of young lads who were also touring and doing interviews and had a family life to maintain. There just wasn't time for it all to be done. And I know it's hard for people to have to come to terms with this because we all love the mythical status of the Beatles that's been sold to us. It's a wonderful story, but is it an accurate one? And if we really are prepared to scrutinize...
And if you think about it deeply, ladies and gentlemen, it ties also in with our imagination. That's why they create these stories. Now, I'm a big fan of rock music and all that stuff, and I love it, but I love it for different reasons also. I'm a bit of an audiophile, so if you have a great sound system and you listen to some of these recordings, even if it contains subliminal messages or some fucked up lyrics, and there's tons of fucked up lyrics if you look at it. But musically, what's being done and what they've created, it's very fascinating from all different kinds of bands, and that's what I enjoy the most out of it. But this is so important to get this. It's you have to zoom out, and I think there's going to be a point where we have to transcend all this. I mean, that's my personal feeling about it, because it sort of keeps us in a loop a little bit. As wonderful as some of it is, I do feel that we sort of have to transcend this. There's some wonderful things of sharing this as well as just getting the insight into it. So everyone has to make up their own mind, obviously, but I think it's very important to get this and to have a look behind the curtain, as they say.
Scrutinize what we're being presented with and examine the detail, we have to conclude that we've been sold a pack of lies, unfortunately, with this group. Well, and again, if that's the case with this group, it's going to be the case with many others.
Well, that's at the heart of what you're suggesting, Mark. Really, that it's a kind of Alice in Wonderland type retrospective. You know, that everything that we thought was good is not good. Everything that it's dark as opposed to light. It's something which is evil as opposed to something which is good, something which is not as wholesome as the early days of the Beatles were being promoted to us. However, the researcher that you mentioned there, whose work is all over the internet, is very clear that there was some kind of playing around with the various personalities in the band, that the band was a construct, if you like, the Beatles, that is, and that the Paul is dead legend, myth, whatever you want to call it, is actually something which demonstrates his thesis that this was all part of a grander plan. Where do you sort of stand in that realm? Do you actually think that the Beatles were who they said they were, and did they remain who they were throughout the tenure of the band?
For many people, the suggestion that the original Paul McCartney died in 1966 and was replaced by an imposter who's been playing the public role ever since is absolutely preposterous. And of course, when you first hear the suggestion, it sounds absolutely preposterous. But I cannot count the amount of subject areas that when I first came across them, they sounded preposterous to me. But when I started to actually be diligent enough to do the research, I came to discover that it's not preposterous at all. Where I stand on that whole thing is I can't prove that the original Paul McCartney died in 1966 or at any point since. What I can prove is that there have been at least two individuals playing the public role of Paul McCartney. And to get to this conclusion, all we need to do is apply the scientific method. All we need to do is trust our five senses. All we need to do is scrutinize the photographic evidence and the film footage that's available to us, and there's no shortage of that. And if we do that, and we compare images side by side, and we compare things like height, forensic detail, facial structure.
Yeah, that's true. There's a couple of things there Osman is putting in the chat. I can't react in the chat because I have to keep my phone close to the laptop, but perhaps if some people in the chat feel like a little chat, in the second hour we could do maybe a little chatting about it, although I have plenty of material, so don't worry. But, if anybody feels like want to say something about these topics, then you're more than welcome. And you only have to let me know in the chat if you want to have a little bit of a chatteroonie.
Voice prints. We have to come to the conclusion that there's more than one guy passing himself off as Paul McCartney there. The only way that could ever be achieved and gotten away with is if the Beatles were working in conjunction with military intelligence operations, because you can't fake somebody's death or get rid of somebody and replace them without it being discovered by these institutions. That's their job. So if you can prove that somebody has been replaced but they've not been called out on it, and there's been no public acknowledgement of it, you have to conclude this is a military-grade operation. And that is the case with the Beatles. Unfortunately, they were assets of the military-industrial complex. I do want to make an important point here, though, because a lot of people find it very soul-destroying to have to face up to these sad truths. And like I said earlier, I wish it was some other way. But this doesn't mean you have to throw out all your old music. It doesn't mean you have to tarnish and demonize these bands in your mind and have nothing to do with them anymore. You can, if you choose, continue to enjoy the music. The music is, after all, great, regardless of who may have produced it or the circumstances in which it was produced. I have a lot of people say to me, thanks a lot for destroying that band for me. There's another one I've got to throw out now. Well, you don't have to. All that's happened is that you've got the information out of the subconscious mind where it could have been having a controlling effect on you, and you brought it through into the conscious mind. Now,
yeah, exactly. That's also a little bit my point. But if you look at it, and it's a very strong control mechanism if you think about it. People are fans of bands lifetime long. They go see these bands maybe less when they get in their age, but look at the Stones. How many people are still going to see the Stones? It's not necessarily a bad thing, but just to take the scope of how much control it takes of your life and where else you could have put in that energy, But these are interesting questions you can ask yourself, I think. But it battles the mind if you think about it. And then all the merchandise that comes in with it, all the money that's been made off of it, and the profit. You don't necessarily, if you're a great musician, you don't necessarily have to sell tons of records and go on endless tours. That's just to keep the machinery going, really. Anyway, this is 11 minutes in. There's about 10 minutes more, and then we'll see if I have another clip, or maybe we'll have a bit of a chat.
You know a bit about where this band most likely came from, what the agendas were that they were most likely pushing, some of the unsavory affiliations and connections that they may have had, some of the families that they may have come out of. Now you can better comprehend this. You can process it. The magic spell has been broken. The mind control is no longer going to be controlling you the way it perhaps once did. And that's actually something to be celebrated, because you're not being mugged off anymore. You're not being made a fool of. Now you've got the opportunity to make a conscious decision for yourself whether you're going to continue to enjoy the music for the music's sake, or whether you're going to throw it all in the bin. So that's a choice people have, to be able to make for themselves.
Absolutely. Mark, let's go back to the 1960s and in this country, if we just stick with that for the moment, what you've talked about, Tavistock Institute, various government agencies, the Beatles. The image we have, today, for example, we're used to conspiracies, we're used to big government and understanding that governments aren't as they appear to be in some instances. The 1960s, for most of us of a certain generation, appear to be a kind of a much more innocent period. Now, there was the Cold War, obviously, at the time, and governments are governments and all the rest of it. But from your research, the level of sophistication that would have been necessary to pass this off, to take four young men from Liverpool and turn them into the biggest musical act on the planet for an agenda which has nothing to do with music.
You couldn't have pulled it off without radio or TV. With newspapers alone, you can get so far. But those tools were definitely instrumental for making that transformation happen.
That's quite an ask, right?
It demonstrates how all these different facets of organised society are intrinsically linked. So the music business is working in conjunction with the film business, with the television industry, with the mainstream media, with academia, with medicine, with science, with government, with big business. Because what was happening in the 60s on both sides of the Atlantic was a major masterclass study in social engineering. They were taking the art form places it had never been before, because it was encompassing every aspect of people's lives. It was aimed squarely at the young people at the time, the youthful generation, the generation known as the baby boomers, who were born towards the tail end of the Second World War and were just starting to come of age in the mid to late 1960s. So it's always the young people in any generation that they're trying to target, because once you get to a particular age, like my point in life, they don't bother with people of my age anymore. I'm too cynical and world-weary and grizzled for them to want to bother with. Whereas young hearts, minds and souls are so more easily malleable, and they're the ones that they want. So in the 50s, for example, which we spoke about last time, I mentioned Bill Haley and the Comets, Rock Around the Clock, and Elvis Presley and all this stuff. And all of that change culture was aimed at the teenagers of the time, except that the word teenager was not in common parlance in the mid-1950s. It was invented for those times. And then if you go a decade or so later, you're in the 1960s, and over in California, you had the so-called counterculture, sort of hippie flower.
Yeah, baby!
The music was changing, it was getting trippy, it was getting psychedelic. There were drugs everywhere, not least LSD, which was the drug of choice on that particular scene, and so much documentation has proven that all that stuff was coming through CIA supply lines. The CIA, biggest pushers of drugs on the surface of Earth. And there were
and still are today
other compounds as well, mescaline and psilocybin mushrooms, and marijuana was getting pushed as well. But over in Britain, there was a counterpart to all of that. There was a British version of the counterculture. It was aimed mainly at London and centred around London, and there were little pockets of it in Oxford and Cambridge coming out of the universities there. But you had bands which personified the psychedelic counterculture in London. One of them was Pink Floyd in its earliest iteration. They were known back then as the Pink Floyd, and they basically came out of Cambridge University, and most of the members of that group came from very wealthy aristocratic families. They were part of the establishment furniture. So in my view, they were inserted into the culture of the times to help push it in certain desired directions. There was LSD in London, all kinds of other drugs at that time as well. The music was changing. The Beatles played their part in that. So they went from She Loves You, I Want to Hold Your Hand, to Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds and Tomorrow Never Knows, Eastern mysticism and trippy psychedelic themes, not least on the Sgt. Pepper album. So you had the same cultural changes being driven in Britain and America at the same time. Now, that doesn't happen by accident. It does not happen in a grassroots organic fashion. It only ever happens in that way if the agencies in Britain and America are working in cahoots with each other with the same shared common aim. And like I said at the very start, entertainment, popular culture, and particularly music offer the perfect vehicles through which to get all that done. It's not really changed since the 60s, or well, the detail has changed, but the agenda has not really changed. Some people might think the 60s was a more innocent sort of era, but when you think about what was getting pushed in terms of societal norms in those times, what it all boiled down to was a breaking up of the traditional family unit, which had persisted largely in society up to that point. It was the encouragement of sexual promiscuity, experimentation with drugs, driving a wedge between the different generations in society, fomenting discord between the youthful generation of the time and their parents' generation and their value systems. So it was very chaotic and very destructive. And the ripples from what was done in the 1960s are still being felt today. And of course, they're still doing the social engineering. They've just changed the detail and they've wheeled out new assets to get the job done to new generations.
Mark, unfortunately, we have come to the end of this second episode with you.
Oh, no, yeah, there's very short bits, but that's good because I don't want to get into it too long. And, when you talk about the 60s, swinging 60s London and Laurel Canyon in Los Angeles, those are some big things to look into. All right, now let me take a look where we are time-wise. Just close to the top of the hour. That's perfect. Well, good to see all of you, ladies and gentlemen. Does anybody wants to come on and have a chat? Then you can call in now. And otherwise, I have another interesting clip on the 80s. Decoding the 80s pop music. It's not too long. It's just 8 minutes. So, you know what? We'll do that first. And if you feel like you want to have a chat about this, then after this clip, the lines will be open. Now, this is apparently part 2. I couldn't find part 1, so we'll just dive into part 2. But it's basically the retiring of the music elements of MTV offers a timely opportunity to reflect on this platform's legacy in terms of pushing mind control, occult, and Illuminati symbolism right from its outset. So, we're going into that, ladies and gentlemen. Good to see all of you. Fuck you, Mr. Jeffrey White, Shelby, and Osman. Thanks for joining in here. We're going to get into the second hour in 10 seconds. And then we'll see where it takes us. So this will be very fascinating indeed. So get ready to rock and roll once more.
Hey folks, we're edging towards the end of January 2026, and I wanted to make this video as a follow-up.
Ooh, well, hang on, ladies and gentlemen. It says 8 minutes. It turns out to be 52 minutes. So, boy. Well, let's just do 50 minutes and see if anybody wants to have a chat. If not, we'll just continue.
To one of the previous ones that I did, examining symbolism in 1980s pop videos. It seems an opportune time to do this, given the recent closure of many aspects of MTV, which, in my view, was launched mainly as a vehicle to get this stuff out there and for mind control and for the subliminal manipulation of the masses through pop videos. And much of that occurred during the first decade of MTV, the 80s. There were aspects of the agenda evident in the 90s, but so much of it was there in the first years of MTV.
It also kind of rose up the entertainment value, you know, with live shows and interviews. And I sort of kind of enjoyed that, you know, like radio was doing that already, but with TV, you know, MTV Live and the cameras hanging around with these rock stars and doing interviews backstage and all that stuff. It definitely put the entertainment value up there as well.
TV. So the parent company Paramount recently closed several dedicated music-only channels in the UK and Europe, such as MTV Music, MTV 80s, MTV.
And what has become of MTV now? It's like I was watching last time. I checked a little bit of television, and now what you have now is Date Naked. Jesus, that's going on in MTV now. It's just completely degenerate.
The 90s and so on. And MTV as a parent company or a holding organization still exists, but mainly deals with reality TV type programs and documentaries and things of that nature. So they basically wound up the music aspects of it. And in my view, this is down to them having achieved their goal. They got the mind control done. They got that symbolism implanted into the subliminal minds of the viewing public through those many years and decades, and they just don't need to be doing that anymore. The agenda has moved on. It's being achieved through other outlets such as social media, and MTV is just a relic from the past now. But it definitely pays dividends to look back at some of the stuff which was getting done in those early years, those pre-internet years, when people had no chance at all of deciphering the symbolism and recognizing what it was that was being aimed straight at their subliminal minds. So the first video is kind of appropriate because the song was co-written and produced by Trevor Horn. And Trevor Horn, as well as being a super producer who's worked with many prominent acts through the decades, was a part of the Buggles. And the Buggles song Video Killed the Radio Star was the first one played on MTV. It was pretty much a theme tune for the whole MTV agenda. So if video killed the radio star, what killed video? Probably social media, right? And technology. But Trevor Horn produced this one, the song at least. The previous single from this group was called Handheld in Black and White. So we're off to a good start already with Freemasonic duality and black and white checkerboard symbolism, which was everywhere in 1980s videos. It's ridiculous.
Think about Cheap Trick, A Band I Love. It's all over the checkerboard colors there with Cheap Trick.
It becomes easier to identify the videos that didn't have that symbolism in it than the ones that did.
By the way, it's a good time also to make some advertisement for tomorrow's show. at 4 a.m. Central European Time. The Rock Archives, and we're gonna go into the band Styx. So that's for tomorrow.
So this song is by Dollar, which was a duo, David Van Day and Therese Bazar. They had a few top 40 hits in the UK in the early 80s. This particular song is called Mirror, Mirror. And this becomes interesting when you start examining trauma-based mind control and the symbolism that goes with that, because mirrors and shattered glass figure big time in that whole scenario. So we'll take a look at this video. It's the first of 6, and at the end of each video, we'll consider what we've just seen. So here we go.
Yeah, this might be a little bit pointless. Think about it if you can't see it. So I'll play a little bit longer. And then, yeah, because you have to see this actually, so. That's why it takes so long, because he's going to play almost this whole clip. So, yeah, I'll have to cut it off there because this is very fascinating. What you'll have to, like I said, you have to see it. So, anywho, well, I would say, well, I opened the fan lines then, so all the fans can call in if they want to. I do have some other material, but I think doing an hour is already quite a lot of material to digest. So. It's about kind of about it. You know, this is all so interesting, and to figure out what's going on. Now I have also some things that are a little bit away from this topic. Let me check. Oh yes, this is also very fascinating stuff. Yeah, it will go in a completely different direction now, ladies and gentlemen. So I will go into this one. This is fascinating. The Sacred Mushroom and the Cross by Mr. John Allegro. So, your kid loves music, yeah. Well, it's all vibrations, isn't it? Well, thanks for joining anyway. You know what? I'm gonna do an hour and a half. We're almost 1 hour and 10 minutes in, and this clip is about close to 20 minutes. This is exploring the ancient mystery. So it all ties in together in the end, because we're talking about mushrooms. We're talking about mind-altering states of consciousness, and well, that's not something very strange thing happening in the music industry. Especially in the '60s and all that. Even the Doors admitted to it. That's why they called the Doors. We did do it to break on through to the other side, to open up our minds. And, Ray Manzarek talked very positively about it. You only need to do it once, once your mind is open, you're done, you're free, and you're peaceful and all that stuff. But is that truly true? I don't know. Perhaps it is. Perhaps it isn't. Anyway, this all ties into to music and everything else. So it's all connected, as they say. So I'll give you this, The Sacred Mushroom and the Cross, a great book. I have it at home. It is very academic read, I say. So if you don't have any foreknowledge of this sort of stuff, it's quite a hard read. But perhaps I will break it down in this clip a little bit more clearly.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Bookercast, the podcast where books come to life.
And I'm so excited to dive into another amazing story with all of you.
Whether you're a bookworm or just love a good story,
Bookworm.
this is the place for you.
Every episode we explore incredible books, talk about their stories and characters, and share insights that'll make you fall in love with reading all over again.
All right, let's not keep you waiting any longer. Get comfortable, and let's jump right into it.
Sounds good.
Welcome to the deep dive. This time, we're tackling a really fascinating book, John M. Allegro's The Sacred Mushroom and the Cross. You guys have really thrown us a curveball with this one. Get ready to explore some pretty unexpected connections between religion, language, and the world of ancient fungi.
Yeah, Allegro's book, it's definitely a head.
How about that, you Christian dupes? Oh, sorry. I got a little bit too of Charles in my mind. Anyway, this is very fascinating stuff. It deals also with Christianity and a lot of other things. So, open to interpretation, I'd say.
Scratcher. He's got this bold idea that that ancient religions, even those that kind of became Judaism and Christianity, were really influenced by Sumerian fertility cults and their use of psychoactive substances, specifically the Amanita muscaria, the mushroom.
So we're talking ancient history, secret societies, psychedelic mushrooms. This is going to be good. What exactly is Allegro? What's his argument here?
Well, he starts with Sumerian, right? The oldest written language that we know of. And Allegro thinks it's the key to unlocking this hidden meaning in religious terms and symbols. By tracing words back to their Sumerian roots, he says he can reveal, a connection to these ancient fertility cults. And you guessed it, mushrooms.
Okay, now I'm really intrigued. Give me an example. How does he connect Sumerian words to mushrooms and religion?
Okay, so let's take the word God. Allegro argues that the Sumerian word for God is really similar to their word for mushroom. And he sees this as evidence that the very concept of God might have come from early experiences with these mind-altering fungi.
Whoa. That's a pretty radical idea. So he's suggesting that the very foundation of religious belief could be traced back to these ancient mushroom rituals.
That's exactly what he's saying. He goes on to analyze other words like sin, grace, even names of gods like Zeus, Yahweh, claiming that they all have hidden meanings related to mushrooms, fertility cults, the whole 9 yards.
So he's saying there's this secret language, this code, hidden in ancient texts, and it points to this widespread mushroom cult. How did he even come up with this theory? It seems like a pretty big leap.
It's definitely it's a bold theory. Allegro was a scholar of ancient languages and cultures, spent years studying Sumerian texts. He became convinced that.
Yeah, exactly. I find it a bit hard with that book. If you don't really have that background or have some interest in some form or other before that, it's quite a hard read, but it's still fascinating.
That there was more to these stories, these ancient stories and symbols than people thought. And he saw this Amanita muscaria mushroom as a central figure in this hidden world.
Well, let's talk about this mushroom, this Amanita muscaria. What was it about it that made it so special to these ancient cultures? Was it just the psychedelic effects?
Well, the psychoactive properties were definitely a factor. Allegro suggests that these early cultures saw altered states of consciousness as as a way to connect with the divine. But there's more to it than that. He says that the mushroom's appearance, how it looks, played a really big role in its symbolism.
I've seen pictures of it. It's that bright red one with the white spots, right? What's so symbolic about that?
Well, think about how it grows. It emerges from this white egg-like sac called a vulva. And Allegro, he saw that as a symbol of birth or creation. Then there's the
Well, take a look at it. If you look at the picture here, you see the Amanita, you see the stem, and then there's this round thing where it's poking into. You could almost suggest there's something going on right there, and then that releases things, and more of them grow. But and if you so happen to know the right way to prepare it, it'll give you insides, apparently. What is this all about?
The shape of the stem is kind of phallic, right? And that was, a symbol of male fertility.
Exactly.
And then the red cap with the white spots reminded people of, of the heavens and stars.
So they saw the mushroom as this powerful symbol of creation, fertility, and even the cosmos.
Exactly.
That's pretty amazing. But how does this tie back to religion specifically?
Allegro believed that the Amanita muscaria...
Sometimes I wonder, it wasn't just all created by a bunch of horny guys, putting all these phallic symbols up there. And they were a little bit too far out of it, you would think. Like, wow, let's just put up a giant penis here and a giant penis there, and that's nice art.
It wasn't just a symbol. It was like the divine itself, the embodiment of the divine. He saw it as the source of like life-giving power, the connection between earth and the heavens. And he argued that this whole belief system, it formed the basis for lots of the world's, major religions.
Hold on, he's saying that religions like Christianity and Judaism, they have their roots in a mushroom cult? That seems like a big stretch.
It's a controversial claim for sure, and one that's been met with with a lot of skepticism from mainstream scholars. But Allegro, he was convinced that he had uncovered.
I can see the J-man hanging around, Hey guys, you want to be my disciples? Well, have a little bit of this. You will see things a little bit more clearly.
Covered this hidden truth, a secret history that had been suppressed for centuries.
Okay, I'm.
And then tell them to kill everybody if they don't accept you to be a king.
Definitely hooked now. Let's dive into some of the specific examples he uses to support his theory. What are some of the biblical stories or figures that he connects to the mushroom?
One of the most striking examples is his take on the Garden of Eden story. Allegro thinks that the forbidden fruit, it wasn't an apple, it was the Amanita muscaria mushroom.
Whoa, that's a really different way to look at that story. So he's saying that
apple isn't really anything close compared to a mushroom. But who knows? We didn't write those scripts.
Adam and Eve's expulsion from paradise was actually about the consequences of consuming this sacred mushroom.
Exactly. Allegro saw the story as a metaphor.
And also, in one way, it makes sense if God tells you don't eat it. You know why? Because if you don't know how to prepare that little thing there, you'll die. So, you can interpret it in many ways, You can take anything you want. But don't take that mushroom unless you just know how to prepare it or something. I'm just making up stuff as I go along anyway.
Or for humanity's expulsion from a state of innocence and divine connection, which was represented by the mushroom. He even argued.
Yeah, and tying this back to the 60s, what is the main thing that they destroyed there? Innocence. Don't be an innocent. Don't be a square, All this sort of psychological rhetoric that they know how to peer pressure you into, especially when you're young and fragile. Look at it nowadays, I mean, what is left of innocence, It's if you're truly innocent, you'll have a horrible life in this world, unfortunately.
That the serpent in the garden, the one that's often seen as like a symbol of temptation, that it actually represented the mushroom itself, offering its knowledge and power.
Okay, now my mind is officially blown. This is getting really deep.
Oh, well,
so
you should listen to me for a bit more, mate.
If Allegro's right, are we saying that that the foundation of Christianity, which is built on the idea of sin and redemption, is actually all about a psychedelic mushroom?
That's a question that continues to spark debate and controversy.
I'd say it's more a psychological trick, keeping people telling them they're sinners and man, you get a mistake. You can make a mistake. You can right a mistake. You can right a wrong, but a sin, it's for your whole life. You have to be guilty.
Even today, Allegro's work really challenged a lot of long-held beliefs about the origins of religion and the nature of the divine. Whether you agree with his conclusions or not, his book makes us confront some big questions. About the nature of belief, the power of symbolism, the hidden history of human consciousness.
This is definitely one of the most thought-provoking deep dives we've done yet. You've given me a lot to think about. Where do we go from here?
Well, I mean, we've only scratched the surface of Allegro's theory. He goes on to analyze, a whole bunch of biblical stories and figures, connecting them to the mushroom and its symbolism. He even looks at the names of biblical characters, and he says they contain like hidden clues to the mushroom cult.
I'm on the edge of my seat. Tell me more. What other secrets did Allegro uncover in the Bible?
Well, one figure that really jumps out is Judas Iscariot. Allegro, he looks at his name and says it's like a coded reference to the Amanita Muscaria. He even suggests that Judas's betrayal of Jesus could be tied to like a symbolic rejection of the mushroom cult.
Wait, so even the villain of the story has a mushroom connection? That's wild. Is he saying Judas was?
Ooh, well, I can play you some things by Charles, where the hero of the story isn't quite a saint either, is he now?
Like a disgruntled former member of the mushroom cult?
Yeah, that's one way to look at it. Allegro's interpretations, they often, challenge our traditional understanding of these figures. He sees them not just as individuals, but as symbolic representations of different aspects of the mushroom and its role in ancient religious practices.
So it's like he's like deciphering a secret code hidden within the Bible. But if this mushroom cult was so widespread,
yeah,
how did they keep it a secret? Especially with the rise of Christianity.
That's a key question. Allegro suggests that early Christians, facing persecution, they had to be clever about how they preserved their beliefs. So they used symbolism and coded language to hide their practices, right in plain sight.
So it's like a secret society within a secret society. Yeah, that's fascinating. What kind of symbols or code words did they use? We talked about God earlier, but what else?
Allegro points to various examples. He suggests that terms like bread and wine, which are central to Christian rituals, they might have actually started as references to the mushroom. He even argues that phrases like the kingdom of God could be interpreted as metaphors for those altered states of consciousness, induced by the Amanita Muscaria.
Yeah, because we know that there's a whole a sort of mushroom kingdom. That's a kingdom, Is that the kingdom of God? Consume some of this stuff, and you'll enter the kingdom.
Yeah. So he's suggesting that the entire language of Christianity is like infused with this hidden mushroom symbolism. I'm starting to see the Bible in a whole new light.
Yeah.
But isn't it a bit of a stretch to say that like every reference to bread or wine is actually about a mushroom? How do we know he's not just seeing what he wants to see?
That's a valid point. Allegro's work is incredibly detailed, but it's also it's also highly speculative. Not everybody agrees with his interpretations, and a lot of scholars criticize his methods, for being too selective and not having enough hard evidence.
So it's more of a thought-provoking theory than a proven fact. But even if he's not totally accurate, it's still a fascinating way to look at the Bible. Right?
Absolutely. Allegro's work, whether you agree with it or not, it makes us think critically about where our beliefs come from. He's not just offering these alternative interpretations. He's pushing us to question assumptions and to explore the possibility that there's more to these ancient texts than we see at first glance.
This deep dive has definitely opened my mind to new possibilities. It makes you wonder what other secrets might be hidden within the language and the symbolism of different cultures, different religions.
Exactly, and that's what's so exciting about Allegro's work. He's not just trying to decode the Bible. He's inviting us to explore the hidden depths of human history and consciousness. He's encouraging us to look beyond the surface and consider the role that that altered states of consciousness, ritual practices, symbolism they might have played in shaping how we understand the world and the divine.
This all ties back to what we were talking about earlier about the importance of altered states of consciousness in ancient religious practices, right? They weren't just worshiping a mushroom. They were trying to connect with something bigger than themselves.
Well, you could argue, what do cults do? Don't they use drugs to change your mind? It's it could be a very nefarious practice as well, in trying to create these cults in the end.
Through this unique and powerful experience.
Exactly. Allegro saw the Amanita Muscaria as like a bridge between the human and the divine, a way to get to a realm of knowledge and experience that was otherwise hidden from view.
It's like they were using the mushroom to tap into a different level of reality, a dimension of consciousness that we might not even fully understand today.
And that's what makes this topic so fascinating. It forces us to confront the limits of our own understanding, and to acknowledge that there might be more to the world than we can see or explain through our current scientific paradigms.
I'm beginning to understand why Allegro's work has been so controversial. He's not just offering a new interpretation of the Bible. He's challenging our entire worldview.
He's making us ask some really big questions, like where do our beliefs come from? What's the nature of consciousness, and how has the human relationship with altered states of consciousness shaped the course of history of religion?
This deep dive has been like a journey into the heart of a mystery. And I have a feeling we're only just getting started. We still need to explore the validity of Allegro's claims and the impact his work has had on our understanding of history and religion.
And we should also think about the ethical implications of his work too. I mean, we are talking about the use of psychoactive substances, and that's a topic that deserves careful consideration.
Absolutely. But before we wrap up, I'm curious to know what has been the response to Allegro's work, within the academic community. Did he find any supporters for his theories, or was he just completely dismissed?
Well, Allegro's book was definitely a bombshell when it was first published. It caused quite a stir, it really shook things up.
So what was the reaction from other scholars? Were they on board with his ideas, or?
Not exactly. To put it mildly, the academic world it wasn't quite ready for Allegro's radical reinterpretation of the Bible. His book, I mean, it was hit with a ton of criticism.
So it was like a total rejection. Or were there any scholars that kind of found something valuable in his ideas?
There were a few. A few who were kind of intrigued by his approach, particularly his focus on Sumerian linguistics and the idea that there could be symbolism within ancient texts. However, the vast majority of scholars they dismissed his theories, said they were far-fetched, and that he didn't have enough solid evidence.
What were their main criticisms? Was it just his focus on mushrooms that they had a problem with, or were there other issues with his methodology, how he did his research?
Well, the mushroom theory, it was definitely a major sticking point. A lot of scholars felt like Allegro was kind of reaching, seeing connections where there weren't any. They also they questioned his heavy reliance on linguistic analysis. They argued that that language is fluid, right, and open to interpretation.
So they felt like he was kind of picking and choosing evidence to fit his theory, instead of approaching the research with an open mind.
And that was a pretty common critique. Critics also pointed out that Allegro's understanding of Sumerian culture and religion it wasn't really complete, and that he often ignored evidence that kind of contradicted his claim.
It sounds like his work, while it was groundbreaking in its scope, how big it was, and its ambition, it was ultimately flawed, how we went about it.
Yeah, that's a fair assessment. But even Allegro's biggest critics, they admitted that his book it brought up some important questions about the origins of religious beliefs and the role of symbolism and altered states of consciousness and in shaping human culture.
So even if his conclusions weren't widely accepted, he still kind of got people talking. Challenged the way things were and made people think differently about the past.
Exactly.
Yeah, and if I will go on a little bit longer because I was thinking, I was listening to this great thing the Osman put up. So everybody listening, check out that show on Strange Days about Jung. And that the question is, even also Krishnamurti said this, that you don't need drugs to get to another state of consciousness. The right ones is a quicker path, but you can do it yourself because it all has to do with basically, knowledge or inner or remembering, even this kind of stuff. That will change your sort of your conscious level. You can see it more in terms of level. It's you can't change some really rational people say you can't change your consciousness, but it is about the awareness, and awareness you can change with insight. It radically changes your point of view. So I just wanted to share a little bit on this that I enjoy. Maybe you people out there enjoy that less, but I think it's very interesting, this whole alchemical process of sort of going within. And let me see if I can find that clip, if I still have it somewhere, because I played it a little bit of this the other day when I had Mr. Mujo on the show. Let me quickly see where it is. Perhaps I have it on another page. No, not sure. Oh, by the way, I also want to mention I was watching Max Egan's show, and I have to still watch it, but he has this clip that he urges people to watch. It's over 4 hours long. You can find it on Odyssey, and this is an interview with William Sasha Riley, who claims to be abused, and not just abused, but by Trump and Epstein. So in the interview, William Sasha Riley presents a harrowing first-hand survivor's account of an extreme child abuse, child trafficking, torture, rape, and murder carried out with an elite criminal enterprise allegedly run by Donald Trump and Jeffrey Epstein over the course of several decades. It is on Odyssey. You can just type "Don't worry, boys are hard to find," and then Lisa Noel, Noelle, Voldeng interviews William Sasha Riley. It is on Odyssey. Check it out. This is going to be very compelling, if that is true. It's heavy stuff. I know that, so he warns. It deals with some very horrible things. But I think it's definitely interesting if you want to know more about this Epstein and Trump connection, because they were best friends. And why they won't release it, So, you have to take everything with a pinch of salt, and you have to make up your own mind, obviously, but that is very interesting in itself. So I wanted to put that out there as well. Now, I'm not sure where I left that clip. Might have closed it. Well, that's too bad. Anyway, we're going to wrap it up by now. Good to see all of you, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for joining. I just want to put one song out there dedicated to the Stout Osman, and it also ties into tomorrow's show about sticks. And this is a song that fits Osman's grandeur, delusion of grandeur. So that's why it's a great one to take it out on, and a great one to introduce the band that we'll be talking about tomorrow. So here we go. Thank you all. Have a good time. Have a good day, wherever you are and whatever you're doing out there. Hope to see you again some other day, some other time. On the world on man.
Ladies and gentlemen, your attention please. In this honor, bearing weight from the city of the big shoulders, the number one contender, the 10th round exhibition for your entertainment. So when the bell sounds, prepare yourselves for the main event.
Thanks all. See you again.